support. I think it's just we're substitute from Am I funny?
Yeah.
Hello everyone, welcome back for the now public business for the motion of this house would raise its children without a gender. So we'll be doing together with the HIST, who represent the Out Debate, and DUGES, who is the Dublin University Gender Equality Society, and they work on campaign for feminist issues, rights of women, and for trans people. And it's important you should go check out their screening of Girlhood. So first off, I'm going to hand it over to the chair, to Noah Galley, who is an artist, a non-binary activist and admin of the Non-Binary Plus in Ireland group.
I call this House to order and call upon the Record Secretary to read the minutes of the last public business meeting.
Hello again, everyone. The last public business meeting of the College Historical Society was held last week. So you might have noticed at this point that these minutes are basically just like jokes/tweets that I made throughout the week that I feel didn't get the recognition that they perhaps deserved. So now I'm going to tell them to you lovely people, and you will laugh and boost my self-esteem. So last week was Rag Week, and because we're all in favour of doing our bit for charity here at the HIST, we decided we would invite UCD over, because you know it's always nice to do something for those less fortunate, especially during Rag Week.
This is about start.
It was really nice, it was cute, you know, the guys from UCD arrived all dressed up in their best GAD jerseys, and those little tracksuit bottoms that are kind of like leggings, I don't know what they are. And they all, they were so excited, they lined up in front square, in front of the campanile, and all got photos so they could send to their granny and say, they're big now. It was heartwarming, it really was, it was lovely. But there was this really awkward moment at the table, when we were about to start, and then one of them leant over and asked me if I had a spare crayon they could write with. There be no further business, the meeting adjourned.
And are there any objections to my signing these minutes as a true and accurate account of the last public business meeting? Then I shall duly sign.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to introduce our guests for tonight. We have two guests on prop. Speaking is Dr. Sarah Sullivan, who's the author and Dean of Social Sciences in UCD. And also on prop is Vanessa Lacey, who is the chairperson of Transparency I, Health and Education Management Manager, and Transgender Equality Network. And our off speaker is Rachel Murphy, Director of Support Services and Program. Okay, so I'll briefly go over running orders for anyone who's not been at a debate before. This is a public debate, so at any point after the first minute mark where you will hear your bell, anyone in the audience is free to stand up and give a point of information, essentially to say that you'll question what they're saying or you'd like a counterpoint. Please keep them about 15 seconds long because it's the speaker's chair, but please feel free to be welcome to do them. At the 6 minute mark you'll hear another bell, which will tell you that then you can no longer offer points of information. That being out, I call on the chair to start the debate with us.
The question before the House this evening is that this House would raise their children without gender. I should now like to call upon Grace Conway to propose this motion to the House.
Traditionally, these speeches start with the speaker addressing the House as ladies and gentlemen, splitting the room into categories of masculine and feminine from the outset. But to do this tonight would go against everything I'm about to say in the next 7 minutes, so instead I'm just going to acknowledge that you're all here and move on. The important thing to remember throughout this debate is that gender is not something that children can choose. It is something which is unwillingly enforced upon us by those closest to us and by society from the outset of our lives. In this debate, I want to illustrate how inflicting gender roles on children before their understanding is fully developed enough to equate with their instinctual sense of self is not only a harmful experience for the child, but also in some cases a dehumanizing one. Doubtless, it is easier for parents to raise little boys and little girls than individuals. Because our modern systems for things like parenting have been inherited from archaic gender roles, and they are developed from archaic gender roles. This provides parents of today with an excellent cop-out. There's no need to, they assume that there's no need to question these outdated assumptions, as they are founded on, a status quo which is universal and proven to be effective, something raising children gendered is something which has been institutionalized and remains uncontested despite its inconsistencies with modern ideas about gender. It remains as harmful because although our reality has changed, our perception of that reality has not. The reality is that most people in this room would hold the idea of deciding how someone else should live, how someone other than themselves should live their life, how they should behave, what they should call themselves, what things they should enjoy, wear, participate in, as something which is restrictive and inherently wrong. We would never dream of denying this freedom to any other human being, let alone someone we care about, and yet this is what we continue to do to our children. Instead of allowing them to organically develop into an individual self, which they can cultivate as they feel right, we enforce these artificially created limitations of gender that were enforced upon us and our parents and our parents' 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 parents. Because that is how things are done, that is how they were always done, and that is, by definition, good parenting. However, when I look back on my childhood, I am haunted by memories of, my closest male friends wanting to play secret Barbies and the fears that went with it. A fear not just of being caught by their peers, but also of their parents finding out. If they put on their sister's dress or swapped clothes with me, they were made to feel like there was something wrong with them. Because they were raised to feel that all little boys should wear trousers, have short hair, and play football. They were told that they weren't allowed to get the princess castle that they longed for Christmas, even though their younger sister was getting one. And their parents ignored the tears and comforted themselves in their ability to handle this tricky situation in a way that conformed to a model of good parenting. No. Fortunately, these particular little boys grew up and were able to make their own decisions and choose their own therapists to deal with all the fuck-ups made by their good parents, who only ever had their best interests at heart, by the way, and by ignoring all of their wishes that they expressed as a child. The harmfulness of masculine culture is something which I imagine is becoming increasingly topical, and I imagine is going to be touched on widely in this debate. However, something which is just as dangerous, if not more so, and largely ignored, is the threat of the feminine maternal culture. There is nothing that I find more disturbing in this world than seeing a 5-year-old female child pushing a plastic baby in a pram. Because just as much as gender is something which the individual must discern for themselves, so is whether or not they are maternal. Children are known to be concrete operational thinkers. Their mind are inherently literal and they internalize things. Therefore, giving a baby doll to a female child and telling her to take care of it is saddling her with something that she is too young to understand the consequences of. You're designating her as a carer, instilling in her that motherhood is something that all women should aspire to, no matter what the future holds. And once that value is instilled, it is something which is irreversible. I'm not a carer. I do not have a single maternal bone in my body, and I dislike children the way that some people dislike dogs. They often make me feel very comfortable, and yet when I express this dislike to any of my female relatives who raised me, they do not take it seriously. Because if you are female, regardless of who you are as an individual, what you identify as, or any aspect of your personality, according to the culture we live in, once you turn 30, a magic button goes off in your head and you feel an insatiable compulsion to reproduce and raise gendered children of your own. This fallacy is so ingrained because it is what little girls are raised to believe and is what they have to look forward to. Despite all the genuine encouragement from their parents, their support of their successes, achievements, and ambition, we are still raising female children to believe that the most rewarding and significant experience of their life will be motherhood. I never felt oppressed by men growing up. My father had the good sense to throw away the baby doll after I repeatedly threw it off the roof and drowned it in the bath. I had a unique experience in my generation in that, for the most part, I was largely raised without gender. However, what I did feel oppressed by were the inescapable gender roles forced upon me by external factors, particularly the school system. Genuine rules of my convent girls' school were that girls had to wear skirts and pinafores. Their hair had to be a certain length. It had to be tied back and kept neat at all times. And it was enforcing this idea of neat and tidy little girls being nice and not roughhousing, keeping copybooks organised, shoes shiny, hair and face clean, playing clappy girly games in the yard with friends and watching High School Musical. I remember a teacher giving out to me once because I didn't know the words to a High School Musical song. They were all traits that were valued in that milieu. Individuality and freedom of expression were not. I was suspended for 2 weeks in 6th class after breaking into the teacher's desk to steal back my copy of Catcher in the Rye, which had been confiscated because she considered it to be inappropriate reading material for a young lady. I was never a young lady, and my father had given me that book because he felt I would enjoy reading it. But despite that, most of us recognise that gender is something which is fluid and can only be decided by the individual. Despite the fact that we continue to force the binary system we are trying to escape in the modern era, creating static gender roles does not explore their sense of self. It allows them to rely on the categories their parents have designated them to fit into, in some cases trapping children into a gender which they do not feel comfortable with and they do not belong to. I am a huge advocate of choice and believe that every human being, no matter how young, should be able to decide how they want to live in the world roles in the future, we need to stop reinforcing them and laying their foundations in children. I beg you to propose.
I should now like to call upon Katie O'Reilly to oppose the motion.
Katie, as this is your first time speaking in chamber, you have as what is known as maiden's rights. This means that nobody can offer your POI. However, if you choose to waive your maiden's rights, I'm going to try a loud round of applause. Would you like to waive your maiden's rights?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight I am opposing the motion, this House would raise their children without gender. Throughout my speech, I will be discussing our ideas of gender, identity within society, gender providing us with a sense of self, and how Eastern tradition looks at gender. My first point I would like to discuss tonight is about what are our ideas of gender. Gender is the state of being male or female, typically used with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones, leading me to discuss how we differentiate sexes, either of two main categories into which humans and most living things are divided on the basis of their reproductive functions. When I think of the sexes, we are most definitely biologically different, and we cannot deny this. However, when I look at gender, there are still differences that exist. These differences do not have to be viewed negatively. Actually, I believe they should be celebrated. If you raise a child without gender, you are taking away their choice to be who they want to be as a person. How is this fair to young children? We should allow them a choice and to bask in their magnificence of their own gender, no thank you, and other people's genders. There's an Irish broadcaster formerly known as Jonathan Clinch, and now known as Jonathan Rachel Clinch. He will sometimes appear on a TV as a man and sometimes a woman. When he or she is broadcasting, they make a very clear distinction if they are broadcasting as a man or a woman. They're celebrating both the masculine and feminine by changing the appearance and giving themselves not one name, but both a male and female name. This differentiation could not be achieved without being aware of both genders. While celebrating gender, I believe we must simultaneously respect our gender counterparts. For example, a Catholic school in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. There were activists saying boys and girls changing rooms should be one and there should be no gender distinction within these changing rooms. This I believe to be quite unfair. What if a girl that is biologically a girl does not want to change in front of a boy that is biologically a boy? She will just have to get over it? This view on there being no gender is a very extreme view, and when anything is taken to an extreme, a lot of people that have different views are forgotten about. Yes?
Is your view that gender is an A or B answer, not in itself, like, ultimately the most kind of, like, definite thing? Like, that's
I think, I'm actually going to discuss this further in my speech, but I think that gender is an energy, and there are differences within the genders, and they can be celebrated. Now, these activists are explaining that self-identification is the sole criteria for gender identity. So they are saying that biology and genetics do not determine gender, and that gender is exclusively determined by how you feel about yourself. And no thank you. Any system on children could be potentially damaging also to their identity and self-worth. For many, we evolve naturally into our gender, and even if we don't, we have the right to change gender we spiritually feel is right. But there is still an existence of gender when choosing how they wish to identify themselves. Children may not have yet conceived the many ideals associated with gender, but giving a child a gender allows them to associate themselves in society and identify with groups within society. No thank you. If we take gender away from children, what will happen? The answer is we actually do not know. How can children form an opinion on gender if gender does not exist? I will reiterate, it is unfair to take away a child's choice on something they have not yet had the chance to form an opinion on for themselves. My next point is that gender provides people with a sense of self-worth. Gender is an energy within people. We see this in many communities. What we cannot hide from here is that our emotional energy situates us in one way. Genders complement each other, and we as humans have both masculine and feminine energy, and we cannot hide this, for we must embrace it. If we were to raise children without gender, what would become of their masculine and feminine energy? When we look at the animal kingdom, they take on gender roles, and they are not affected by the media or what society tells them. They simply naturally embrace what comes most naturally, no thank you, to them. In the Lion Kingdom, the female hunts for food and the male dominates the pride. Nobody has told them that they must do this, but there is still a clear distinction between what these two genders do in order to survive. Finally, no thank you, I would like to look at the influences of Eastern tradition world and how they give rise to one another. No thank you. Gender is not something we need to discard or shy away from. Equality between genders is what is necessary. There is nothing wrong with having a gender. We complement each other, and I believe that comes with great empowerment within ourselves and within our communities. In conclusion, I believe children should be raised with gender. Gender gives each of us a self-worth, an identity, and something we can relate to in such a hectic world. I'm not saying, no thank you, I am not saying we have to inflict gender roles on children because they are born male or female. We are merely biologically allowing them to understand what they are. If later in life, when they form their own opinions and feel they relate to a different gender, that is absolutely fine. I believe all people and genders matter. We are all beautiful people trying to get through this tough, competitive, and yet amazing world. Genders are there to complement each other, and we can learn to grow further by accepting the differences and similarities we both share. Two genders is far better than none. We are here tonight with the Gender Equality Society, and I think gender equality is the paramount philosophy behind tonight's debate, which is why I am opposing the motion. Thank you.
Good evening all, and thanks very much for inviting me here to speak to this motion. I suppose I'm going to be very academic the way that I speak, because that's my background and that's the way I'm used to speaking. So apologies in advance. So I'm going to start with some definitions. We've been hearing a lot about the term gender, and I just want to start by outlining a little bit about how I understand that term and how sociologists distinguish between sex and gender, because I think it's really important in terms of this motion. So sex is the term that captures one biological difference in human bodies, that women are born with XX chromosomes and men are born with XY chromosomes. However, as scholars like Anne Fausto Sterling tell us, biology is not quite that straightforward once we begin to delve into it. And once we look at different intersex conditions that are there, we start multiplying the number of biological sexes we need to include in the spectrum. So she reckons 5, other people say 7, I've seen people talk about 9, okay? So this binary idea of two sexes is very problematic and very unstable. It should also be noted that, as Simone de Beauvoir famously argued back in the 1960s, yes, biological facts about men and women are indeed true enough. We'd be stupid to pretend there weren't concrete biological differences. But what we do with those facts is up to us as social beings. So this then brings us to gender. For a sociologist, this is the term used for socially learned behaviours and expectations that society associates with these two sexes. As I say, that starting point already problematic. Now, I teach a module on gender. I have done for a very long time. And one of the scholars I draw on a lot is the work of Raewyn Connell, who has a really persuasive argument around this sex-gender distinction. So she argues there's no fixed biological basis for this social process of gender. She asks us to destabilise that notion. She says the simplest evidence for this is that gender is always changing. It's not fixed at all. So we just have to think about how it varies cross-culturally at this point in time, or how it varies historically in terms of our own society and culture. Okay, so the way I was brought up is very different to the way that you were brought up, and very, very different to the way that my great-grandparents were brought up. So if gender was this fixed thing, that couldn't happen. It would have to be stable. It couldn't mutate the way it does. So for sociologists, gender doesn't follow from biology in an unproblematic way. Instead, what we see is a very complex interaction between the biological and the social. They each influence each other, actually. Okay? So the social influences the biological, which in turn influences the social. So they're in that chain. So we can't think about either of them separately. So the way bodies develop, just to give a simple example, is always affected by social processes. So that could be food, it could be the kind of work, it could be medicine, any of those things really change bodies in a particular culture at a particular time. As has already been mentioned, in our culture currently, we have this model of a binary understanding of gender, dividing the human population into two types. We've, on one side, male-bodied masculine people, and on the other side, we have female-bodied feminine ones. But again, things become very complicated pretty quickly, because in practice, our gender identity may or may not align with our biological sex. As I've said, they don't necessarily follow. Movement also highlights for us the fluidity of gender than this binary model would suggest to us. And that's one of the things that's really notable, I suppose, in culture currently, that visibility, and particularly how we get access to the everyday experience of people who are perhaps different to us or perhaps similar to us, but it opens up those very, very fixed notions around binary ideals of gender. The main problem for me with the binary system is that it focuses on highlighting gender differences always and completely ignoring the huge similarities that are there within either gender. So the belief is it turns out to be much, much stronger than the differences themselves. This is something Cordelia Fine has really given a beautiful description of in her review of neurological research on male and female brains. She describes this as delusional, this idea of seeing this binary divide between men and women. So she argues, and many other researchers argue the same, that the two sexes are much more similar than they are different. And the other finding from this research is overall variations within the sexes are greater than the variations between them. And in fact, that leads us to suggest, or leads me to suggest, that any statement, evidence, or preferences that refers to men or refers to women as if they're all the same is extremely unlikely to be true. I find it very difficult to think of an example myself. Okay, so all of this academic sociology brings me now to the motion, the idea of raising children without gender. So why is it an attractive idea, you might ask? Well, first of all, if the idea of gender as fixed and immutable is not supported by the available evidence, then it seems quite illogical to ignore that and to continue to put a huge amount of work and effort into producing gendered beings. This also reproduces the system. So it's not just that we're producing gendered beings, we're also reproducing a gender order. But it's much more than illogical, as has already been alluded to. It has the potential to cause, particularly those who don't need to be considered masculine, or boys who have interests or preferences that are traditionally considered feminine. It limits opportunities for all children. It places them in very restrictive gendered boxes. It doesn't permit them to explore the wide range of toys, jobs, leisure activities, and other things that might be available to them, school subjects. So it's closing down their opportunities, closing down their experience. And really, we shouldn't be doing this to children. The philosopher Bridgehouse argues that children have a right to an open future. By this, he means that life options should not be closed down, should never be closed down for children by parents or by other adults before their capacity for self-determination is fully developed and can be realised. So the right to this open future, I think, provides a very strong rationale for raising children without gender. So just to paraphrase that campaign from 2015, the really successful social media campaign Let Toys Be Toys, which was campaigning against gendered stereotyped toys, we should simply let children be children and not construct them as masculine or feminine first. The next thing to consider is how to raise children without gender. This is something that's often thought of as a difficult prospect. But again, when we look at how children are raised and brought up, it is something highly influenced by parental reinforcement, by discouragement, and by modelling. Gender difference is not something that simply exists because it's not following on in a non-problematic way from the biological. So Connell argues it is something that happens and it's something that has to be made to happen. Okay, it just doesn't exist on its own. And because of that, it's something that can be unmade and it's something that can be altered. It's something that we have some kind of control over. So to raise a child without gender then, it's to seek to avoid what Emily Kane has termed the gender trap. It involves disrupting this apparently natural boundary between these two separate worlds of the girls on the one hand and the boys on the other, the pinks and the blues, and seeing the world in that very binary way. She has done research on how parents raise their children, and she's come across a number of different orientations that parents have. So some are perfectly happy to fall in with traditional models and traditional ways of raising children, but others are seeking to craft a different type of parenting style. So it's interesting to pay attention to how they do it and what kind of conscious decision making goes into that. So they're trying to think about a way of developing their own parenting style that doesn't reproduce what they've seen in their own lives and doesn't force preconceived gender norms onto their children. Instead, it trusts children to find their own position on the gender continuum, something that will take time for them to develop. It also involves exposing children to a wide range of gender types and gives them the freedom to explore these without judging them. So this is much more than just allowing boys play with Barbies or allow girls play with, play rugby or whatever. It's much more radical than that. Now she terms this innovative parenting. She sees tactics including applauding gender nonconformity in kids, not applauding gender conformity, which is what we tend to do. We tend to reinforce gender conformity. We describe kids as good girl, good boy. Okay, so we're reinforcing, again, their gendered identities. She also argues very strongly that these parents try and follow their children's preferences, actually, and be led by them, rather than imposing their own model on the children. And the other thing that's there in these parents' practice is a need to really acknowledge and discuss the inevitable gendering that will go on outside of the home, okay, and find some kind of vocabulary and some way of discussing these encounters the children will routinely fall into. Okay, so the past 20 years have seen major change in Ireland. I've done some research on gender and work, and that shows us that there's a lot of attitudinal and behavioural change over that period. There's also a lot of disruption and reshaping in terms of Irish gender relations. So that's something that we're seeing around us. Conventional gender expectations do persist, but they're increasingly unstable, and they can be challenged. They're not set in stone. One reason why changes in parenting practices may have been slow is that many parents are concerned that their children fit in with the dominant culture around them, and that there might be negative consequences for children who don't wear correct clothes or play with correct toys. They might be teased, they might be bullied, or they might be excluded. These fears are strongest for boys, Kane argues. But in her research on parents seeking to avoid raising kids with gender, these negative consequences did not follow. So I'll close with a quote from Kane, from the very end of the gender trap. Fixed in nature or inevitable in society. With concerted effort, we can reduce the focus of the gender trap and open up a possibility for a better, less constrained and more equitable world for our children and ourselves.
Okay, before I start, can I just say if I could marry your speech, I would. Like, please let me come to yours. That was so amazing. But yeah. Binary, probably about. And it's not really about raising kids to gender biases, which are inherent, which are actually things that kids pick up socially, not necessarily from their family, but from the media, from their education, from their peers. And this is something that occurs developmentally from the age of aware of gender. I acknowledge that's a feminine thing. I can do that. I also choose to wear brogues now, and just what's really important here, that the children have a in trying to identify. And it is for those reasons, because I of curiosity and choice for children, and because it's an
God, it's hard to get out of there. No, not really. Can I have my water though, please? Hello everybody, and thanks a million for the invite for proposing the motion. I won't be speaking academically. I only wish I could speak as powerfully as you, Shibanji. I thought it was fantastic. I think she deserves another round of applause. I'll be speaking on a personal perspective and also a professional perspective as working with transgender people and their families. In 2009, my mother died of cancer. 3 days before she died, I was allowed to go see her. No makeup and my hair tied back and androgynous clothes. I got half an hour with her and then I went downstairs. My older brother said to me, "Are you interested in carrying Mom's coffin when she dies?" And I said, it didn't really strike me. I was more worried about my mother dying. So he said, "Well, that's good, because I can't imagine anybody wanting to put their arm around you." The day of her funeral, my father came up to me and congratulated me. He said, "Are you happy now?" And where did it all start? It all started from as far back as I can remember. Whether I was 2 or whether I was 3 or 5 or 6, I don't know. But as far as I remembered, I never felt comfortable playing with boys. I never felt comfortable playing with boys' stuff. I never had any association with my brother. but I played with the girls. And because of my natural behaviour, of which I didn't choose, I was punished. I was punished from my natural behaviour as a human being, with no choice whatsoever, just who I was. If I had have got a choice, I would not have chosen this. But I had no choice. So I conformed. And I conformed to what my parents' expectations were from me and what society's expectations were from me, and I fitted into that binary system of male and female. I conformed and I performed as a male. And because of that performance, and because of that of creating a facade, many other people were brought into my facade because of my performance as a male of what I wasn't. I did not have a choice. On my communion, and many stories I hear from young people and families of young people, the communion is a very, very traumatic time. For me, I had to wear a boy's suit with short pants. For me, it was like putting on clothes of barbed wire. It tore on my skin. It felt my skin was bleeding because of what I had to wear. Before that, my mum dressed me in colourful clothes. I always remember a beautiful red blazer I had with little brass buttons. But it all changed with communion. Again, I had to fit in the binary of male and female, and mine was male. So many of the families that I have the privilege of working with now have very similar stories. Very similar stories of the pain that the children have trying to fit in the binary of male or female. And many of the children don't think about it. They just veer through or to the clothes that they associate with or the ties that they associate with. They just veer towards them. It gives the parents the pain. I've yet to receive a phone call off a parent of a transgender child who is delighted and celebrates, we have a transgender child, we're so happy. Usually, the first phone call, the first connection with a parent consists of 10 minutes of crying and then the words, I have never spoke to anybody about this before. It comes into the family secrets and the family shame and the embarrassment to the family. It causes conflict in the relationships with their spouses. It causes conflict in the relationships with their children. It causes conflict in relationship with the external family of grandparents and uncles and aunts and sisters and brothers. And why? And why? And why do we do this? Why do we do this? Why do we do this to human beings? Why do we do this to babies? Why do we choose when babies are born that this is the way that we are going to raise you, whether you like it or not? And they do this too with intersex babies. But they don't just do this to intersex babies, they carry out operations and surgery on intersex babies to fit them into the norms of the binary, boy or girl. Hundreds of years ago, in different societies, they raised children without having the construct of male or female. For example, they had the North American twin-spirit Indian, and many of the tribes lived quite happily, quite loose, accepted. Not even accepted is a shit word. They were revered. They were revered and they were part of their tribe. They were seen as very spiritual, that could see many different sides. They were consulted on any laws that the tribe were carrying out. But it all changed. It all changed with the conquest of forgotten gold, where the Europeans went over and we imposed our binary systems and binary laws of black and white on people before lived quite freely. So it wasn't always there. And the question was for us to choose, will the house raise our children without gender? And I think, what difference? The fucking house. It's none of your business. It's none of your business. What difference is it going to make to the people who are homeless outside these doors, who have no heat and no food, who are disconnected from their families, who are addicted to drugs, from our world what is suffering so much from different things? What difference will it make if we allow families to raise their child without gender? But what difference will it make to that child? What difference will it make to the child who is allowed to find their own gender expression? They may not fit in the binary, or they may fit in the binary. But who knows? But the child will choose. And it will not be an easy decision for the parents to do that. And what might happen from that? That child will go to bed on a Monday night or a Tuesday night and will not have to fear getting up in the morning, having to perform, having to create a facade, having to be congratulated by their father for killing their mother, because it will not be a situation. The parents will not have to sit down, listen to the child whining and crying because they have to go and perform. They will not have to think about explaining to their families, to their sisters and brothers, to their mothers and fathers, that their child, their grandchild, identifies in a certain way, because it won't fucking matter. So I suggest to this house, leave children be children. Leave them choose their own gender. And if they want to choose the gender binary, great. If they want to walk down the pink aisle in Smith's and get dolls, or if they want to walk down the blue aisle and get whatever is down there, I don't know. But allow the children to be themselves, because they're our next generation and they will give us hope. And that's, as human beings, is. Thank you very much.
Chairperson, Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen, using the binary system. Vanessa, that was an incredibly powerful and emotive speech. I think it really touched a note with everybody. And it's a very difficult job to stand up here and oppose emotion after hearing a speech like that. What I will say is that I'm really glad, because actually what I'm saying is not that far away from what you're saying. Thank goodness. Because I don't think I could have, in all honesty, stood up and followed that with anything but a much more, I think, let's say, a reasoned debate about what we're talking about. I'm delighted to be here this evening. I'm actually an honorary member of the college. So the last time I stood at a ballot box, which was not as new looking as this one, was a good 20 years ago. And it's kind of strange to be back. And I used to sit there, just in those seats there, and then I used to sit there. And so it's a very odd feeling to be back, but it's lovely. So thank you very much for asking me to be back. And I'm not going to go on too much about it because I could fill in the next 20 minutes giving reminiscences about my time in the HIST. Anyway, the raising children without gender, the topic is actually very reflective of the societal changes that have happened since I was a member here in the HIST. At that time, we thought a debate about gender was radical, let alone bringing children into it. And interestingly enough, when we were having a discussion, Sarah and Vanessa, we were talking upstairs, and we reckoned that really 3 years ago we wouldn't be having a debate in this house. And Vanessa posed the question, why is it important that this house would raise children without gender? The one reason that it's important is that it's enabling people to express what they think and what they view on gender issues. It's allowing us to have a discussion and an open debate, and that can only be a good thing. So, clearly from where I'm seated on the side of the House I'm in opposition to the motion, and there are a myriad of reasons why, which I'm going to outline. I just want to say none of them are conservative, I'm not closed-minded, and I'm not restrictive, and I'm not something of a phobe. I have a certain, and I suppose unfortunately a debate about this topic, it's so emotive and it has a profound impact on a number of people, so it can rarely be objective. And those with an opposing point of view can often be labelled in a derogatory way, which does no side of either debate any favours. I mean, language that's already been used this evening are things like inflict and damage and dehumanise, rather than talking about the positive sides as well. Katie defined gender, and I was delighted then when Dr. Sarah, I can't remember your surname, Sarah, well, I'll call her Dr. Sarah, when Dr. Sarah gave a definition, which again was actually very much what I was thinking as well, which is essentially that you cannot divorce the biological and sociological construct of gender. My experience is, I'm a woman, I'm a feminist, and my experience of working with males, I'm a senior manager in an organisation, and I have 3 other colleagues, and they're all white middle-class males and heterosexual, and all have children. I'm the only female, I'm not married. I am heterosexual, but that's about the only thing I have in common with them. And I have noticed that there are significant differences in the way that men and women think and perceive and work with each other. And that goes beyond, I believe that's a significant difference that we can't just be ignored. So what I want to do is look at this from an equality perspective. And it's about gender equality, and for me, I need to be very clear on this. Equality is about treating everybody equally, regardless of who or what or how they are, no more, no less. It's not about better than, it's not about superiority, and it's not about having the moral high ground. It is about accepting people for who they are, ensuring that everybody has equality of opportunity, equality of access, and equality of outcomes. And that's where our energy should be focused, not on the micro issue of raising children without gender, but rather the macro issue that we live in a deeply unequal and divided state. The corollary is we're living in one of the most liberal times ever. We've marriage equality, divorce after a fashion. I'm sure, do you still have the abortion debates, and do they cause as much controversy as they used to back in the day? Yeah, the good old reliable always fills the house. But, you know, the legislation has moved on, and that is recognising that society too has moved on. And as you know, under the equality legislation, you cannot discriminate on the grounds of membership of the traveller community, sexual orientation, ethnicity, age, religion, marriage or family status, gender or disability. Don't get me wrong, it happens all the day in a myriad of ways. But the point is, it is illegal. There is recourse there when you are discriminated against. We've come a long way. In fact, we've come further in the last 50 years when it comes to issues of gender inequality than we have in the preceding 500 years. I mean, this isn't a debate about poverty. The majority of people living in poverty are women. It isn't about employment. The majority of people in low-income jobs are women, and there's a disparity among the highest paid, both in terms of salaries and those holding senior positions. It isn't about academic choices, although the majority of people doing STEM subjects are not women. It isn't about politics, although the majority of TDs are not women. And that's just purely from a binary gender perspective, without touching on the issues such as sexuality and disability. It's unequal. Society is stacked against anybody who is not white, male, middle class. That's a reality. So I'm looking around here and I'm going, you've got great futures ahead of you. Some of you will have to fight an awful lot harder to get that equality. But you see, that's what I'm saying. From where I'm standing, raising children without gender is the least of society's worries. I don't believe for one second if we adopted this approach that we would be able to develop and maintain a more equal society. In fact, the approach flies in the face of embracing difference. Instead, it tries to eradicate it. I've learnt this evening that there are 9, up to 9, isn't it, different types of gender.
No, sex.
Sex, sorry, 9 different types of sex. I am learning, I told you, I'm very open to learning. But the point is that if you talk about trying to raise children without gender, as my colleague here did, like I say, we're not about eradication. Surely we're about embracing difference and about accepting difference and about treating everybody equally, no matter who they are. Raising a child without gender, first of all, by the way, it's ahead of you. I don't have kids, but I've seen the impact it has on friends and family. Being a parent is bloody hard work. It's really, really hard. So if you wanted to raise a child without gender, it would be a difficult task for all but the most single-minded of parents. And I would question the rationale behind a somewhat extreme form of parenting. One moment. In fact, I question the rationale behind any extreme form of parenting. The vast majority of parents want their child to be happy and healthy and have opportunities in life. Is raising a child without gender going to contribute to that aim? There's no evidence to support it, no longitudinal studies, and I would offer no overwhelming majority of people demanding that this is the way that this should be done. I don't believe parenting should be made to make a child agent for social change. But trying to avoid gender stereotypes that many parents subscribe to. Before I go to that point,
So this isn't necessarily a debate about like keeping the children completely isolated from any concept of gender. However, it is a debate about raising a child without any expectations based on what their biological father.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I don't see that it is a bad thing. In fact, what I'm trying to say is that avoiding the gender stereotypes is something that an awful lot of parents actually subscribe to in some form or another. My son wants to play with the kitchen, grand. My child or my daughter likes to climb trees, great. They select gender-neutral toys, they select gender-neutral books, and they try to ensure that their kids aren't stereotyped. We're up against it. There's already been mentioned. If you've ever been in Smith's, those blue and pink aisles are absolutely horrific. And there is no neutral aisle. Everything has to be forced into a box. And don't talk to me about Disney princesses. I don't know what it is about them, but my nieces are drawn to them like moths to flames. Anyway, they also play with bow and arrows, mind you, so there is some saving hope there somewhere. But it is important for parents to expose their children to gender-neutral clothes and toys. But it's not important to push them into being gender-neutral, because they're not. It's an artificial construct, in the same way as girls' stuff and boys' stuff is an artificial construct. It runs the risk of inhibiting important developmental skills, decision-making, and developing an individual sense of self. So perhaps, to my mind, it's more important to enable the child to make choices and promote equality and embracing difference. That, to me, is the key part here. I'm going to skip forward a little bit. Good timing there, wasn't it? I work for Feroiga, which is an organisation that works with young people. We work with about 50,000 young people throughout the 26 counties. Some of you may be aware of it if you're not from Dublin, particularly discos. Apparently they're quite popular in Feroiga. But just to say as well that adolescence is one of the most turbulent times in any person's life. Most of you sitting here have very strong memories of it at this stage. There's so much going on for an adolescent. Questions of identity, independence, peer acceptance, and all of this while the brain is developing and biological changes are taking place. It's a really tough time to be a teenager in Ireland. There has never been as much pressure to perform or to conform. There's serious global issues. And there's questions of employment, immigration, as well as the fundamental question that every adolescent tries to answer: who am I? I was involved in a study recently. I was involved in developing the National Youth Strategy, which is the government policy on children. It covers the ages from 10 to 24. And we did research into what young people is about. And basically, what young people in Ireland care about, and this is based on a survey of approximately 67,000 young people, of about 20,000 were aged 10 to 24. The most important things in a young person's life are being safe and secure, family, friends, and hobbies. And the top issues in their lives are good mental health, learning and studying, jobs, positive self-image, and relationships and sexuality. So I think for young people, the issue goes deeper than gender. I think it's that an awful lot of young people feel isolated, alone, different and scared. And I think it's about we need to embrace young people and ensure that they have a sense of belonging, they have a sense of community, and that they can be accepted for who they are. I don't think raising a child as gender neutral is going to help that. I think it will contribute to the sense of other, being isolated, being different. And that's why we need to look at the macro. Society embracing difference and treating everybody equally. In some ways it's just as utopian as the idea of raising gender neutral children, but perhaps if we were all to work together rather than segregating specific issues, we'd all be the richer for it. So just to wrap up as well, I think that we need to ensure, when it comes to parenting young people, we need to focus on bringing children and young people up to believe in themselves, to believe that they can be anything they want to be and that who they are is good enough. We need to ensure that children and young people respect themselves and others, embrace equality and value difference. If we could focus parenting skills on that, then perhaps we might just change the world. Love, acceptance, belief, encouragement. These are the key to happy, secure, safe, confident young people, and ultimately our more equal and just society. Final note, the general election was called today. If you want to make a difference to society, if you want to bring about change, vote. Thank you very much.
Girls wear pink, like to nurture others, and are emotional. They're passive, submissive, and are better at cooking. Boys, on the other hand, wear blue. They don't cry, are good at sports, and make money. People, not ladies and gentlemen, our society places a gender binary on all of us from the day we are born. We are told that as a man we must have this specific set of characteristics, and as a woman we must have this different specific set of characteristics. Whether or not, some of those characteristics may apply, the reality of the situation is when you raise your child, free person. So I want to talk about three things. Firstly, I want to talk about what happens when you ascribe certain characteristics to people specifically based on their gender. Second of all, I'm going to talk about without gender, what sort of happens to them. So firstly, what happens when you ascribe certain characteristics to someone based on their gender? Three different people tend to conform to that. When you tell someone that these are the specific characteristics that apply to you as a boy, that you should be sporty, that you should like blue, that you should play with action men, or whatever, if you're a boy, you're probably going to do those things. You're probably going to feel that you should do those things, especially when all your friends are playing with action men, and when there's a sort of a social isolation, essentially, that you would feel if you didn't do that, because you essentially feel that is something wrong, that you shouldn't be doing because you're not a boy. But second of all, people also treat you differently, specifically like parents in this case. So parents will buy their girls Barbies and those sort of mini kitchenette things, and they'll take them to dancing lessons, and then so for example, if they see their son out playing in the garden and he falls over, they're less likely to sort of run out and pick him up, whereas if they see their girl out playing in the garden and the girl falls over, they run out and pick them up straight away, which is actually allowed to girls, even though if they start out with a sort of same level of motor skills, girls sometimes generally tend to not develop their motor skills as much because of parents' intervention there, in that they perceive their girls essentially to be less of the outdoorsy type than boys. So what happens then to those children? You essentially remove the ability for that child to experience those things. So in a lot of cases, like boys maybe don't feel comfortable asking their parents to bring them to dancing lessons, Irish dancing lessons specifically, in my case. You know, and you prevent that person from doing things that they might otherwise enjoy, and like enjoy like a lot more than going and playing football with the lads. But as a child yourself, you're also no thanks, Jamie. But as a child yourself, you're quite likely to feel bad if those are things that you want to do. If everyone around you is playing with Action Men and you don't want to play with Action Men, but your parents are also telling you that you should play with Action Men or whatever. I mean, I did actually play with Action Men. That doesn't specifically apply to me. But like, if you're someone who doesn't want to do those things, then you feel bad, and you actually like feel quite isolated in that sense, in that you don't conform to those things. No thanks. So what actually happens when you raise a child without gender? Sort of what does that really mean? It's not that you like buy your children androgynous clothes or androgynous toys or like things that don't specifically apply to any gender. It's that you can buy your child a mix of clothes. That means you can buy them like whether or not your child is a boy or a girl, you can buy them like pink frilly dresses or like blue shirts or whatever. And it means like the toys that you buy for them or the activities that you bring them to don't necessarily have to apply to either gender. But like ultimately here though, your child still has the final say in that choice. So if your child says, I don't want to wear a dress, or like I don't want to go to dancing lessons or whatever, you don't force that on that child. I think that is particularly wrong. No, thank you. So in this way, what you were doing is you were allowing that child to express themselves in a myriad of ways, especially from a young age, where that child like doesn't necessarily know what they want to do. They're never going to have a chance to experience like a myriad of different things if you don't like let them try out everything. And that's essentially what this debate is about. It's essentially about letting your child experience like all those different things. But like the final thing that I would say that you probably should do, no thank you, is you can still talk to your child about gender. So you can still talk to your child about the way people who present as female in the world are treated. You can still talk to your child about those sort of concepts. So that means like your child is still prepared when they go out in the world, and they're quite likely, like if they present it like as female, like at some point during their childhood, they're quite likely to have experienced, no thank you, the same sort of mistreatment that sort of women experience. So it means like they can still be like qualified and able to deal with those experiences when they encounter them later in life. So I don't think Shivangi's point there really holds up. No thanks. So lastly then, sort of what happens to those children? So it means those children are no longer bound by the social norms that encompass them and their gender. They can choose how they want to define themselves. So now they can be someone who likes to play sports, but also likes to play with baby borns. You don't remove any options from that child, and they don't feel bad when they choose specific things that don't necessarily conform to their gender. So you're allowing them, you're also allowing them to feel comfortable with whatever they do. So this is again sort of on Shivangi's point about how they are essentially, and to some extent, the last speaker's point about sort of isolation with those children. So they don't feel comfortable playing with boys or girls. What actually happens is they feel comfortable. They're more comfortable now playing with both boys and girls. They don't necessarily feel it is wrong to go girl. You're actually out of time. Sorry, and play football with them. They can be anything that they want to be, and we think that is the most important thing for a child, that they should have the opportunity to be whoever they want to be. For all those reasons, I beg you to propose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's always an honour and privilege to speak to the College Historical Society. So my speech is going to be a list, and the theme of this list is going to be reasons why this is a very, very bad idea. So let's get stuck into it, shall we? Because at the outset there's been a lot of confusion as to what this debate actually means. There's a lot because we haven't had a definition really of what does it mean to raise a child gender neutral. Because propositions say that we don't like gender norms, we want to just give children choice, and if they want to go one way, we'll let them give them that choice. Whereas opposition, on the other hand, say your gender as being male or female. The idea of not having a gender is something which is more important than having that gender. And that is a broader ethos which goes behind parenting. So Stephen, in the point of information, says that, once again, you let children go down way, you don't have expectations for them. That's all well and good in a world in which people who are biologically male or female have exact equal probability of identifying with a male or female, or any hypothetical ideas in between. But the reality is, we live in a world in which an awful lot of young baby boys do become boys and men. A world in which a lot of young baby girls do indeed become girls and women. And the question becomes, if you decide to buy your child a load of toys, you buy the male toys, you buy the female toys, you buy all the toys in between, and your baby boy decides to play with all the male toys and doesn't want anything front with the idea of the commitment to gender neutrality, you begin to ask yourself, am I raising my boy incorrectly? Have I done something wrong? Because in spite of his attempt to bring up in a gender-neutral world, they're still choosing gender. That's the real cognitive dissonance that lies in case. It brings a certain sense when raising a child that if they do associate along with a part of the gender binary, that is forsaking the idea of raising a child without gender. I think that's an immediate obstacle to gender neutrality as ethos in parenting. That's the first thing. But another part of this is that we have to acknowledge that gender is part of the reality of the way a lot of people in society live their world. It is a part of your identity insofar as other people are able to identify you as being male or female. And within that, in a world in which you're taught by your parents that you don't truly have a gender, it makes it very, very difficult for you to relate to people who do have definite gender. It means that when you were in school and you're with boys and girls in the playground, it becomes very difficult for you to say that you feel a common sense of them. They say that the stereotypes and ideas that go with being male and female are very oppressive, but not as bad as the stereotypes that come when you were seen by other kids in the playground not to have a gender, when you were seen as something that they can't relate to because it's completely outside of their experience, ladies and gentlemen. No thanks. In that sense, it becomes, once again, a very massive obstacle because it's a good analogy to describe this is the analogy of love. Love is something which can be very much raise your day, can be wonderful, traumatic, or fantastic experience to have. It can also at times be very, very traumatic. And indeed, if you're someone who's never felt love before, you don't feel like you're missing out on anything necessarily. If you haven't experienced it, it's not important. What matters is, if you are one of the few people who cannot experience love in a world in which everybody else can, that's something which can make you feel tremendously lonely, tremendously left out. It can feel like you were which is also very difficult. Go.
Okay, in your first point you say, well, if you as a parent and your child only plays a boy's toy, you should probably be disappointed that they weren't perfectly distributed. Then in the second point, the big question is, oh, what if your child can't decide what it is? Can a child clearly decide
That's not what I said.
or what it wants to be?
That's not what I said. I didn't say that children didn't know what they were. I'm saying that your gender is not something which is real, that your gender is only just something which is socially constructed. Then it makes it very difficult for children to feel that the natural inclinations which they feel in terms of toys they want to play with and they relate to other children in the playground is something which cannot be part of their identity. I'm saying that that's something which is really, really problematic because it means that when all the other children in the playground act in ways which they feel completely instinctual about, completely comfortable with, you end up feeling uncomfortable about it because you're told that that is something which society is telling you to do. And I want to be serious about this. We are talking about something which we all, on some level, have experience with. We all were given toys by our parents at birth. But how many of us actually had a problem with the toys our parents gave us? I mean, certainly yes. On proposition, we did a genuine legitimate example. But in terms of that, the fact that gender does not work for some people who legitimately are transgender or of the rest of society. I mean, even to the extent, our parents' goal normally is to make us happy. And oftentimes, the way that we behave, even when that fits in with gender, because they feel they want want us to be happy in a world in which we are able to allow our gender to flourish and to blossom. Yes, there are some people who don't fit into that. Yes, there are people who are born in the body of a male, but they have always fundamentally identified as being female. But that ends up raising the question. If we live in a society in which the vast majority are cisgendered, how is it in any way appropriate to raise them as if they're anything but cisgendered? If they decide to choose to express their gender identity in a way that's different, that's wonderful. Facilitate that. I'm all for choice, despite what I said at the start of the speech. But really, if the overall ethos you have of a parent is to elevate the idea of gender neutrality above the idea of just whatever gender your child feels best represents them, then what you are doing is going to cause more problems than it actually solves. I'm happy to oppose.
I will now put the question to the House on the motion that this House would raise their children without a gender. All those in favour? Aye. All those against? I hope you have all enjoyed this debate run by the HIST and DU Gender Equality Society this evening. It is a great motion to see being discussed, as I think it marks a real change into how people are now viewing gender. I will be speaking in the place of Kay Cairns, founder of Non-Binary Plus Ireland, as they were unable to make it this evening. Kay Cairns is one of the most prominent non-binary activists in Ireland at the minute, and I was honoured to have them ask me to speak in their stead. While the speakers with or without gender, perhaps a more apt topic to be discussing would be the way in which society is so inherently gendered. It is society that tells us to colour code our babies when they are born, based on what they have in their nappies. As the other speakers have said, that tells us what is and what is not gender or gender specific. In this several aspects of, implications of, and what it means to live in a gendered society. It may seem like a tired, old cliche, or even a joke at this stage to say the notion. What I mean when I say that gender is a social construct is that the differences between genders are created when society attributes certain gender roles to different genders, which then become considered the ideal for that specific gender. These gender roles are completely arbitrary and can often be constricting to a person in achieving their full potential. I will show to you all how truly arbitrary the way in which we assign gender based on their genitals. If it is a quote-unquote girl, the child is clothed in pink. I personally think that if you were to mull this over, you'd find it quite odd. We decide based on physical attributes a person's gender, something which is part of your identity and not at all physical. This assigning of gender to babies, as some of the speakers have already mentioned, when they have absolute no concept of self, can in some cases be damaging and oftentimes constricting to achieving a person's maximum potential. I would like to start by looking at how assigning a person's gender based on external anatomy can be damaging. As a non-binary, trans guy standing before you all, being told I was a girl my whole life was something being with other slut. Baby girl. To question these practices, or as to how they may be damaging to people whose gender does not align with their sex. The entire arbitrary practice of assigning gender that doesn't want you to think about that facet when you colour code your baby in pink or in blue. I would also like to take this moment to draw attention to an issue that some of you share. While non-binary people are, of course, a bit trans as a trans woman and a trans man, we do face a certain set of unique challenges. In society, we are taught that there are two genders, and that is what some of you believe here tonight. However, we as non-binary people completely fly in the face of that. Oftentimes, people can assume that all non-binary people share the same experiences when it comes to gender, when that could not be further from the truth. Within the term non-binary, there are people who are gender fluid, agender, bigender, genderqueer, intergender, androgen. The list is endless, and we all experience gender in a diaspora of ways. The way in which society is gendered in such a binary way results in us feeling invalidated. Because we are told that our identities are just a phase, and we are told that we are not real. If we can remove the importance attached to these two binary genders, perhaps then society can become more accepting of those who are non-binary. We need there for equality for both trans people and women, both cis and trans. The workplace is often an interesting point to start with when looking at inequalities, which is why I too will be using it. I think the majority of us here are all very aware between men and women, according to the National Women's Council of Ireland, is almost 14%, with that rising to over 24% in the top 10% of income earners. Women are being paid less for simply being women. They can be doing the same job as a man and still get paid less for it. Women will get paid at work because society tells us that they will just go off and have a load of kids and become housebound, or because women are quite simply more domestic than men. This, of course, as we all know, is absolute nonsense. However, the fact that a person's gender can have such an impact on someone's livelihood comes down to, yes, you all guessed it, society. If we go on to look at trans unemployment rates, we can further see the inequalities that a gendered society is perpetuating. TENI, Transgender Equality Network Ireland, reports that only half of trans people are employed. As a trans person, I find that statistic fucking terrifying. Why are so many of us unemployed? The most likely reason is that trans people are being discriminated against in their search for work, or because society has so negatively affected us that they are unable to work. Why? Because society tells people that gender is important to the outside world, to the working world, to everyone, but the person that it is affecting. I think it could now be interesting to look at how choosing to view only two colours, pink and blue, out of an entire rainbow is so bleak. Think of all the beauty that surrounds you on a daily basis. The green of the grass, the oranges and pinks of a sunset, the deep, inky black of a night sky, and the silvery white of the moon. If we choose to only have pink and blue, we would not experience any of these beautiful sights. In the same way that if we choose to have only boys and girls, we are denying ourselves the ability to see the beauty of all people who fall outside that cis-specific binary. We are denying ourselves the knowledge and the experience of knowing non-binary people, of knowing trans people, of knowing intersex people. We are basically denying ourselves a wealth of experiences based on a person's gender. I'm sorry, does anyone else not find that fucked up? The only person that gender should affect is the individual. Gender should not be something that affects the subjects you take in school, the job you have, the amount you're paid, the respect you get, or how you're treated. Gender is not something that should affect how you live your life. However, sadly, it does. Gender is intrinsic to the society that has been created, and it is our duty as decent human beings to remove that apparent importance. Talk about being binary, about being intersex. I have not spoken this evening about intersex people because I personally do not feel well versed enough to do so in a way that should not be the case. We should all be able to discuss these topics with the ease that we chat about our favourite TV shows around the dinner table. We need to remove the importance of gender so that we can gain equality in the society that we are all living in. If you are to take anything away from this speech, I would hope that it would be the following. That the importance that we place on gender is doing a lot to perpetuate the inequalities that many of us fight against on a day-to-day basis. That non-binary people exist and our genders are and should be considered valid. And finally, that there are more colours out there than just pink and blue, and however queer this may sound, there's a whole rainbow out there to discover. Thank you. As well as if you so wish to identify as trans, if you so wish to be added to the Irish Trans support. I can't remember the Irish Trans Students Alliance. She really is a great place to get support and find people that can relate to you on a gender level. So thank you so much for listening to me ramble on.
Speakers as a whole, which was a genuinely fascinating debate. To our reception, we'll be very excited to win it once more.